In a desolate wasteland, Rick gets launched several feet across the floor during a fight, and he is seriously worried that he may die. Just then, his mentors emerge from the smoke, and rather than administer some first aid, they praise him for improving so much over the past 2 years of training, so he should have no problem with the E-rank adventurer exams now. And the praise is nice, but he still needs medical attention. Normally, the adventurers in this world are all young people due to all the strain that it would put on a person's body, but there are still some adults who never give up on their dreams, and that's why Rick is still trying to take the entrance exam. He walks up to the reception desk and asks for his exam ticket to be issued. But while the receptionist is confirming his details, she happens to recognize Rick and excitedly reminds him that used to know each other. Rick doesn't recognize her at first, but he soon recalls that he last saw her 2 years ago. They used to be co-workers, and she was really shocked when Rick resigned from his position out of nowhere, but even more so when she heard that he quit his job to become an adventurer. Rick is a little embarrassed since people in their 30s like him usually wouldn't apply to become adventurers. Normally, you'd start at G-rank in your teens and work your way up to E within a year or two. The receptionist asks what Rick has been up to these past 2 years since she hadn't heard from him at all. So Rick explains that he was pretty much cooped up in the mountains the entire time so that he could train with his mentors. Just then, the guild's usual drunkard walks up to the front desk and starts trying to flirt with the receptionist. But when she tries to decline because she is still obviously working, the guy doesn't take no for an answer, so he starts getting a little rough with the receptionist. And that's when Rick decides to step in, so he pulls the guy aside and lightly tabs his stomach with enough force to knock him out instantly. The receptionist apologizes for the inconvenience the drunk guy caused him, but Rick says it's fine since he used to work as a receptionist as well, and he still doesn't understand why the guild thinks it is a good idea to serve alcohol in here. After Rick receives his exam number, he heads outside where a maid named Renette greets him. She asks if Rick is done with his registration, and Rick confirms as much, thanking her for waiting for him. And while he says this, he is intently staring at Renette's huge jiggly puffs. She calls him out on this, so Rick tries to change the subject and talk about how excited he is for the exam. Back inside, the other adventurers are in shock at the handprint that was left on the drunk guy's armor, and that armor was made of dense steel, so whoever did this must be seriously strong. Just then, two guys walk in and recognize the drunk guy from a mugshot they saw a while back. His name is Domold, and he is an A-rank adventurer who's wanted for 30 counts of assault. The receptionist knows that Rick is the one who did this, but if he was really able to take out an A-rank adventurer, then he may be overqualified. In the meantime, Rick is getting a physical exam done, and its height is measured to be about 5'8", but the physician are surprised Rick is taking this test when he's already 32 years old. After that, all the examinees are led to the next room where they are instructed to place their hands on the crystal ball to measure their mana. They will glow depending on the level of mana a person possesses, so the others touch it, they get varying results with the highest being a C. But when it's Rick's turn, the orb barely lights up at all, so the examiner gives Rick an F on his mana exam. The other candidates begin mocking Rick for having such a low mana score as he leaves, but once the examiner calls for the next candidate to step up, the orb spontaneously shatters. The next test is one to measure the candidate's offensive abilities, so they are instructed to strike the green rod as hard as they can. It is a special slime bag that can absorb a lot of impacts, so they don't need to worry about damaging it. Rick remembers training with a slime bag once, and at the time, one of his mentors told him that he had to be able to destroy a golden slime bag with nothing but his fists. Rick didn't think that was possible since a golden slime bag is as hard as a dragon's fang, but his mentor told him that it was the least he had to do if he wanted to become an adventurer, and since his mentor was able to effortlessly destroy one with a single punch, Rick became motivated to train until it broke, even if he had to punch it 50,000 times a day. He hated that training, but back to the present, the candidates begin lining up in to strike the bag with all their might, and after the first guy has kicked it, the next candidate called up is the second son of the Dermute family, and it is rumored that his magic is as strong as a C-rank adventurer's despite only being 11 years old. As the boy begins, he casts a Hellflame spell, and everyone is surprised, including Rick. Although he's surprised because the spell is so tiny, the fireball is launched and hits the target, and the judges are actually impressed by the kid's output, so Rick is even more shocked since the fireballs his magic teacher would throw at him were far more deadly than what that kid just used. Naturally, Rick assumes the kid's fireball must have been just as powerful as his teacher's fireball, but maybe the kid shrunk it down so that it wouldn't destroy the building. As the attack power exam goes on, it eventually gets to Rick's turn, but as he is walking up to the slime bag, the examiner calls his attention and asks if he is really over 30 years old. Rick answers yes, so the examiner tells him that he is too old to be doing stuff like this. Training usually doesn't yield much of a result unless it is started very early on in life, and with how bad his mana exam score was, he should just quit before he makes a fool of himself. Rick knows people are judging him for being too old, and he really feels like giving up, but he has worked too hard to get to this point, punching slime bags until his knuckles were red with blood, and he still kept punching. All that pain has to count for something, so even if he is at a disadvantage for being old, he's going to give this everything he's got. Rick winds up his punch, and as he makes contact with the bag, it splatters everywhere and goes flying through the wall, leaving everyone shocked, including Rick's, since he wasn't expecting the bag to be so weak. The kid can't believe what he just witnessed, and he is frustrated by Rick's success, since this was supposed to be his stage to shine on, but he can accept losing to Rick for now since his specialty is really defensive magic, so he will make sure to outperform Rick on the next test. However, by the time they start the next test, the kid is left speechless as Rick has just tanked a 4th nature spell with ease. The examiner compliments Rick on being skilled enough to block his attacks, and Rick appreciates it, since he is doing his best. The instructor doesn't think Rick is actually giving it his all since he has just been using a first nature spell to defend himself so far, so he advises Rick to use a higher tier of defensive magic from now on. However, Rick informs him that he doesn't actually know how to use any other spells aside from first order ones, so he really is doing the best he can. The examiner can't believe Rick is actually only capable of using first order spells since he has such precise control over his mana, but Rick assures him that there won't be any problems since, from what he has seen so far, his first order spells should be more than enough to handle anything the examiner can throw at him. The examiner takes that as a personal insult, so he prepares to use a 5th order spell to show Rick that he shouldn't take someone like him lightly. As he casts the spell and unleashes a shock cyclone, a massive shockwave echoes through the kingdom, so far that even a knight on the other side of town could hear it. A few minutes later, Sylvester arrives at the exam center to figure out what's going on over here. He is informed that an F-rank adventurer managed to completely destroy a slime bag with his bare hands and perfectly block a 5th nature spell while only using basic defense magic. Sylvester thinks she must be playing a prank on him or something, but she is dead serious about everything she just told him. Right now, Rick is busy taking the written part of this exam, and he looks like he's confident in his knowledge for this one. After the test is over, Rick takes a break with Rionette, and she asks him how the written test went. Rick confidently answers that he is sure he will get 100% on the written test. After all, he spent 14 years working as a receptionist for the guild, so there's no way he could fail. However, he's still not sure his overall scores will be good enough to pass the exam. Rionette asks if Rick is worried about his practical exam scores, but he thinks he did pretty well in all the categories. However, he still got an F on his mana exam, so he's not sure how that will affect his chances of passing. Rionette assures Rick that he should be fine after all the training he did to prepare for this exam, but moments later, the kid from earlier comes up to Rick and screams at him for doing too well on the tests. Rick doesn't know what this is about, so he assumes Freed must have gotten lost or something, so he offers to help him. Freed is upset because this was supposed to be the day he showed off his exceptional skills to all the peasants, but Rick went and outperformed him, so he's crying about it now. Rick tries to tell Freed that he didn't intend to steal his spotlight, but Freed's sister has already arrived, and after seeing her little brother crying, she immediately starts yelling at Rick. Rick asks if she is related to Freed by any chance, so she introduces herself as Angelica Diremute, and Freed wastes no time in telling her that this 40-year-old man ruined his day. Rick is offended and says he is only 30, but Angelica and Freed keep calling him a 40-year-old man. Eventually, Angelica throws her glove at Rick to challenge him to a duel, and Rick doesn't realize that it's a challenge, so he picks up the glove because he doesn't want it to get stained. Unfortunately, as per noble customs, picking up that glove is a declaration of intent to throw hands, so Angelica happily sets a venue for them to begin the fight. She says she is going to take great pleasure in punishing Rick for the crime of making her brother cry, but if they are going to do this, then they have to play by the rules. Duels in the Fylheim Kingdom allows the winner to set a penalty for the loser if they win, so she sets a penalty stating that the loser will have to serve the winner for the rest of their life. Angelica is apparently a second-class royal knight, but Rick doesn't know how strong a second-class knight is supposed to be, so Rionette gives him some context and explains that a second-class knight would be around B rank. Rick starts freaking out because he knows B rank adventurers are able to take out huge monsters on their own, but Rionette doesn't think it's a big deal and asks Rick to hold back so he doesn't end up killing her. Rick can't imagine holding back against someone at B rank while he is still F rank, since he still has no context for how strong he truly is, so Rionette tells him to just have faith in all the training he has done for the last 2 years. All of a sudden, all the traumatic training montages he had to go through come flooding into his mind, so he ends up throwing up. Rick curses Rionette for making him relive such torture. But she reminds him that if he was able to survive all that, then he shouldn't have a problem handling Angelica. After all, he's a member of the strongest party on the continent, so he should have a little more faith in himself. Rick realizes that she's right, so he gets up to face Angelica with no fear. He is still not sure how well his current level of strength will hold up against a second-class knight, but there's no use worrying about it now. Angelica is confident that she is much stronger than Rick, so she promises to hold back against him so that he doesn't die, and then begins charging up her attack. She then uses Blink Step to dash past Rick, just to show him how fast she is. Her speed has earned her the title of Lightspeed Angelica, and Rick is definitely surprised, but not for the reason she thinks. Angelica says she will now finish him off with her next attack, so she uses Blink Step again. But as she's approaching Rick, he can't believe what he's seeing because Angelica is moving so slow. The power scales must have been high on copium if they thought she was worthy of the Lightspeed title, because she is moving slower than his normal running speed. Rick easily dodges her strike, and Angelica can't believe it since it should be impossible for an F-rank adventurer to keep up with her speed. In fact, only first-class knights have ever managed to react to her speed, so she rationalizes it by saying Rick just got lucky, but she won't let it happen again. She uses Blink Step once more, but in Rick's eyes, she is still moving really slow, so he wonders how she could have possibly made it to B rank like this. He is starting to realize that he may actually be pretty strong, but just as he is getting ready to dodge Angelica's attack, she trips on a rock and briefly unlocks the vertical B-blade attack. Rick can't predict any of the strikes, so he is having trouble dodging, and by the time Angelica finally stops herself, he no longer thinks he can call himself strong because he was completely unprepared for that attack. However, neither was Angelica because she didn't plan any of that. She tries to play it cool and tells Rick she's impressed that he managed to dodge her last attack because she totally meant to do that, but that just means she will have to go even faster to overwhelm him. She uses her special technique, which allows her to move 3 times faster than normal. But even though she is 3 times faster, she is still pretty slow to Rick. However, he chooses not to attack carelessly since he doesn't know what kind of tricks she might have up her sleeve, so he dodges instead, and Angelica is left flabbergasted that Rick can still keep up with her. She can only use that technique 2 more times before she runs out of energy, so she gives it everything she has and goes for one last desperate attack. However, she trips once more, so Rick tries to intercept her with a punch and ends up blowing a hole in the ground. Angelica realizes that she would have died from a punch like that if it had connected, so she is terrified of Rick and questions who he really is. Rick just says he is a former receptionist turned adventurer. He is eager to continue his fight with Angelica, so he climbs out of the hole to face her again, but Angelica immediately surrenders so she doesn't end up getting killed. Rick doesn't understand why she is giving up, but her surrendering makes him the winner, and as per the penalty Angelica set, she now has to serve him for the rest of her life. Angelica had forgotten all about that penalty, so she does the only thing she can think to do and runs away. Rick doesn't really care about the bet, so he doesn't chase after her, and the results of the exam will be coming out soon, so he needs to go back to check if he passed. This is when Reinette tells Rick that the rest of his mentors will be coming to check on him, and Rick starts freaking out because their presence always spells trouble. Rick and Reinette head back to the exam center for now, and they are told that the results will soon be announced through their exam tickets. If you pass, your ticket will glow blue and you will be allowed to move on to the second stage of the exams, but anything else would mean the candidate has failed. Rick is really worried that he might have failed the exam, so Reinette tries to reassure him that he did well on the exam. Rick thinks Reinette is nice for trying to make him feel better, and if he were 10 years younger, he would totally marry her. But she also has her scary side as she threatens to triple his training if he somehow managed to fail. Just then, Rick's card begins to glow, so he picks it up in anticipation, and he is elated to discover that he has successfully passed the first exam. He leaves the hall with Reinette, but as he steps outside, a dreadful stench fills his nostrils. He looks over and sees this rich dude walking straight up to Reinette, and he immediately introduces himself as the eldest son of the Diremute family, Raster Diremute. Rick has had to deal with 2 Diremute family members already, but this time Raster isn't here for Rick, he's here to shoot his shot with Reinette. Rick tries to introduce himself to Raster, but Raster wants nothing to do with a muscular middle-aged man, so he goes back to talking to Reinette and tells her that he is deeply in love with her jugs. Sorry, he meant to say personality, and wants Reinette to come with him so that she can become his second wife. This is where Rick draws the line since he can't lose Reinette to someone like Raster, so he steps in front of Reinette and says she is his girlfriend, so Raster has no right to shoot his shot anymore. Raster looks down and notices that Rick is holding an exam card, which means he must still be F rank, and he finds it hilarious that someone as old as Rick is still at the lowest rank. Rick tries to defend himself by saying Raster is a little too old to be taking the exam as well since he looks like he's at least 25, but Raster just laughs and tells Rick that he isn't here as an examinee. He already passed this test back when he was 14, so he's actually an A-rank adventurer, and he is here as an instructor for the second part of the exam. Believing he has asserted dominance over Rick, Raster turns back to Rionette and asks her if she would like to join him for dinner, but Rionette shuts him down and says the only man she'll go with is Rick, especially with the ungodly amount of perfume Raster sprayed on himself. Raster is enraged and can't accept that he won't be getting Rionette to go with him, so he swears that if he ends up in charge of Rick's exam, that he will make sure Rick suffers as much as possible. And that definitely going to make Rionette love him instead totally. After Raster walks off, Rick prays that he doesn't have to deal with him during the exam, but then he notices that Rionette is still clinging on to him, so he jumps back in embarrassment. He apologizes to Rionette for calling her his girlfriend all of a sudden, but Rionette says he doesn't need to be sorry about it since he did it to get rid of Raster, and it made her really happy. Meanwhile, Raster's stewing in rage because he couldn't get Rionette to be his second wife, and he lost her to a middle-aged man at that. Just then, his two siblings come running up to him and Fried says an old man was messing with him during the exam, while Angelica complains that the same old man beat her in a duel and wanted to make her his servant, even though she is the one who made the bet to begin with. The way they say it makes it sound like they didn't do anything wrong, so Raster is outraged that someone would dare to humiliate his family like this, but when he learns that the one who did this is Rick, he gets a wicked grin on his face because he now has an excuse to get payback. A while later, the mock battles are about to begin, and Rick is really nervous about it. Rionette asks him to make sure he holds back during the exam, but Rick still believes he is weak, so he doesn't understand why he would have to hold back against people who should be stronger than him. And he still has to worry about Raster since it would be terrible if he was the one in charge of his test. Just then, Rick and Rionette bump into a man named Lynx, and he says he will be the one in charge of Rick's exam, and Rick instantly begins celebrating because that's one more thing he doesn't have to worry about. Lynx goes on to say that he is surprised that Rick would want to switch jobs to an adventurer at his age, but it's not like he is saying it's a bad thing. In fact, he believes it is inspiring that Rick still has the determination to work toward his dreams, and he can relate since they are similar in age. Lynx became an adventurer back when he was 24, but in the 20 years since then, he has only been able to achieve B rank. But if he wants to accomplish his goals, he would need to get to A rank. Seeing Rick work so hard has motivated him to do his best as well, and he is excited to test Rick in the upcoming mock battle, but he won't be going easy on him. However, around the corner, we see Raster lurking with devious activity on his mind. As Rick and Lynx part ways, Lynx walks down the dark stairwell, and out of nowhere, Raster shows up behind him with a proposal which doubles as a threat. At the same time, Rick and Rionette are waiting in the locker room, and Rick seems to be in a much better mood than he was earlier, and it's all because he got Lynx as his instructor. However, a moment later, someone comes in to announce that Lynx has mysteriously fallen ill, so he won't be able to act as an instructor anymore. In his place, Raster has been assigned to take over Rick's exam, and Rick starts freaking out. Rionette mentions that Raster must have pulled some illegal strings to get this to happen, and since he is related to Angelica and Fried, he may be holding a grudge against Rick. The other examinees in the room begin talking about how terrible it is to have Raster as your instructor for the exam, and while he may be a dignified member of the Daremute family, he is also known for how much he enjoys beating up F-rank adventurers. Every single year, he picks a particular adventurer to mess with and does everything in his power to make them fail, which is bad news for Rick since Raster definitely hates his guts right now. Later, as Raster is outside tormenting a random examinee, he fires a barrage of ice blasts and knocks the guy out. But just as he was insulting the examinee for being weak, his fun gets interrupted as he receives a message from the elite guard. Meanwhile, Rick is pacing around inside as it is soon going to be his turn and he doesn't know how he is going to handle Raster. Rionette doesn't understand what Rick is so worried about since he just needs to beat Raster. However, Rick thinks beating Raster is impossible since he is a respected A-rank adventurer, while Rick is only F-rank. He believes he will die if he faces Raster, but if he backs out, he will have to do 3 times his normal training. Rionette gets in front of Rick and asks him if he really isn't confident in his skills. He sincerely believes that he is an inadequate adventurer since he switched to this job too late in life and everyone always tells him that he is too old to do it. But Rionette tells him that he shouldn't let what other people think shake his confidence because all that matters is that she believes in him. Even if Rick can't believe in himself, she wants him to trust her judgment when she says he can win. Rick thanks her for her kind words and says he is feeling much more confident now. Just then, a cloaked boy approaches Rick and offers him a free fortune-telling. He explicitly says there's nothing shady going on here, so despite this whole thing being really suspicious, Rick decides to go along with it. However, just as Rick is about to sit down, Rionette notices a magic circle on the chair, so she tries to warn Rick that it's a trap, but she ends up being too late as Rick is teleported away in an instant. After that, the boy removes his cloak and reveals that he is actually freed, and he is quite pleased with himself for being able to trick Rick into falling for his trap. However, he should have thought of a plan to teleport himself away as well, since Reinette is severely pissed and blows a hole through the wall while holding him by the collar. She asks Freed where Rick has been teleported to, and Freed refuses to tell her initially. But after a non-consensual eyelash trim and the threat of some eye poking, Freed tells her that his teleportation magic can only send someone 100 meters away at most, so Rick is still nearby. Meanwhile, Rick has just appeared on the river behind the training center, and he is really confused about how he got here in the first place. Just then, the elite guard shows up and Rick is told that unfortunately, they have orders to beat him up. They are the elite guard of the Diarmid family, so Rick realizes that Raster and the others must be behind this. They don't want Raster to get his hands dirty, so they'll make it so that Rick won't be able to participate in the exam. Rick calls them shameless for trying to stall him so he misses his exam, but the leader corrects him and says this is a coordinated jumping. Among the elite guard, they have B and A rank adventurers, so Rick feels like he is utterly outmatched. As he is contemplating what to do, he notices some people standing on the ledge nearby, and upon taking a closer look, he realizes that they are the senior members of his party, and they scare him more than the elite guard. His party members jump down to ask Rick why he is here when he has an exam to get to, so fearing for the lives of the elite guard, he makes up a lie that they were just trying to help him get ready. Rostin offers to join them if they are doing training, but Rick knows how hellish training with Broston is, so he tries to warn the leader of the elite guard to get everyone to leave before they get themselves killed. The leader doesn't take him seriously and tells his team to kill Broston, but as one of them tries to slash Broston on the head, the sword shatters to pieces, and Broston is just standing there stone-faced. He commends the guy for strengthening his body well, but he is disappointed that he failed to strengthen his weapon enough so that it wouldn't break. The guy gets angry and decides to use his fists instead, but that goes about as well as you would expect since Broston just grabs his hand and squishes it until it turns purple. However, Broston tells him that he doesn't need to worry since he has healing magic to restore his mangled hand to normal. The leader of the elite guard is starting to realize that he might have screwed up by attacking these guys and finally seems to be grasping how powerful they truly are. While all this is going on, Nezette asks Rick if the elite guard are really here to pick a fight with him. Rick confirms it, so Nezette says he will handle it for him in a peaceful manner. He then proceeds to pull out his Super Fire Barrel Mk3 rifle and fires at all the people within range, leaving them limp on the ground. Rick yells at him for killing everyone when he said he would resolve this peacefully, but Nezette asserts that none of them are dead yet, probably. One guy tries to take Alice as a hostage to gain the upper hand, but he has no idea just how badly he just messed up. Even Broston tells him that he had better back away from her slowly if he doesn't want to die, but the guy doesn't listen and hits Alice to get her to shut up, and his fate was sealed once he did that because Alice proceeds to vaporize him. The other members of the elite guard can't believe what just happened, but the leader has figured out exactly what's going on, so he tells them that the vampire girl is a prodigy who is the world's strongest mage despite only being 10 years old. Alistair Drackle. Mizet is a dwarf who is so skilled that he can make technology no one has ever seen before, and Broston is an orc with incredible strength and wisdom. They are all S-rank adventurers, meaning they possess strength beyond common sense, and on top of that, they are part of a party which consists entirely of S-rank adventurers or Chalcom Fist. The leader never thought he would get to see such powerful people in person, so now that he has, he decides to do the smart thing and retire from the elite guard effective immediately. However, the rest of the guys who didn't quit ended up having to deal with Alice, so Rick just tries to ignore all the screams of pain and focus on his exam. Rick makes it back to Reinette after she has dealt with Freed, and they soon find Lynx, who has been badly beaten. Earlier, Raster cornered Lynx and asked him what his dream was, and when Lynx answered that he wanted to build a school for the kids back in his village, Raster said screw those kids and beat Lynx up for daring to have a dream. Raster did this so that he could get to Rick, and Rick is insanely pissed about it. So while he was scared before, he now has nothing but determination to beat Raster's ass. But before that, this is Adolf, and he's going to tell us about the 4 cores of power in this world. They are strength, dexterity, magic capacity, and magic control. And it just so happens that Adolf was born with the special ability to tell exactly how much power a person possesses by looking at them. To demonstrate, he looks at a random examinee and sees that the guy is a total weakling, so expectedly he gets taken out by Raster immediately. On the other hand, Raster is a powerhouse with most of his stats going into mana capacity, so it hurts a little for Adolf to look at him since scanning strong people strains his eyes. As a result, when he took a look at Rick, he straight up went blind. Meanwhile, in the stands, Rick's former co-worker goes up to Rionette and introduces herself as Elisa Granger and says she had seen Rick with Rionette the day before, so when Rionette tells her that she's part of Rick's party, Elisa is overjoyed to hear that Rick has new friends, and since everyone was getting ready to watch Rick's test, Rionette invites Elisa to join them. She happily agrees and walks over to the seats, but she is shocked by Brosnan being here since he's an orc. Mizette invites Rionette to sit next to him, but she politely declines since Mizette is guaranteed to harass her if she sits anywhere near him. Just then, Mizette notices the girl standing behind Rionette and asks who she is, so Rionette introduces her as Rick's former co-worker and Elisa greets them all. Mizette notices the huge personality Elisa has, so he eagerly offers her the seat next to him, but Rionette isn't going to let Elisa fall victim to Mizette's perverted intentions. Just then, Rick steps out into the arena, so Brosnan asks Rionette how she thinks Rick will do in the exam. She confidently says Rick will pass the exam without incident, but Elisa doesn't think it'll be that easy. She says Raster is an A-rank adventurer, and he is known for using excessive force to beat down the E-rank adventurers, but if Raster is just A-rank, then Brosnan is sure Rick won't have any trouble. As the fight is about to begin, Angelica and a badly injured Freed cheer for Raster to teach Rick a lesson, and Raster intends to. He doesn't know how Rick managed to escape the guys who were meant to beat him up, but they are nowhere near as strong as him. Rick asks Raster why he became an adventurer, and Raster answers that he just did it for the status since so long as he has a high rank, he gets to beat up rookies for fun. He doesn't actually have to put himself in any danger, and he can show his adventurer card anytime someone questions his authority. If his reasons are truly so shallow, then Rick says he refuses to lose to him no matter what. Raster begins by firing a level 1 ice spell at Rick, and he intentionally misses, but Rick didn't move an inch. He mocks Rick for being frozen in fear, but the real reason Rick is standing still is because Rionette had advised him to use the first minute of the battle to calm himself and observe Raster's movements. Raster is getting ready to attack Rick for real this time, so he casts a level 3 fire spell at Rick, and Rick is impressed by Raster casting such a spell so quickly, but he has to keep observing so he can't dodge it. The fire blast hits Rick head-on, and while Elisa is really worried about him, Rick turns out to be perfectly fine. Brosnan tells Elisa that Rick is strong enough that a blast like that has no chance of damaging him. He explains that of the 4 cores of power, mana capacity must be trained from an early age, otherwise one loses all hope of growing in that category. It usually has a limit of about 20, so since Rick became an adventurer at the age of 30, his mana capacity is really low, which is why he puts so much effort into training the other areas. Brosnan trained him in physical strength and had Rick do things like running between villages, but with giant 100-kilogram ankle weights attached and venomous snakes that chased him through the forest. Brosnan did everything he could to build up Rick's strength, and Mizette trained him in mana control, and it's honestly surprising that Mizette didn't give up on teaching halfway through since he never liked working. But when it came to Rick, he wanted to make sure that Rick could put up some good magical defenses, otherwise he would have been a pile of ash by now. He also says Rionette was the one who trained Rick in dexterity, and this comes as a shock to Elisa since she thought Rionette was a maid, but Rionette just enjoys wearing maid outfits for fun. Rick put everything he has into learning from them, so he already possesses the power of an S-rank adventurer, although he doesn't realize it since Brosnan kept gaslighting him into thinking F-rank adventurers were much stronger than him. As Raster is about to cast another spell, he begins insulting Rick and Lynx for being too old to stick around in the adventurer business. And as he says this, he throws every elemental attack in his skill tree at Rick. By the time he's done, he believes Rick must be dead or at least severely injured, but to his and his siblings' horror, Rick survived all of that without a single scratch. Raster is starting to get annoyed by how resilient Rick is, so he decides that he will finish Rick off with his bare hands. He casts a strengthening spell on his hands and feet before rushing in to attack Rick, but as he throws a punch, Rick counters with a punch of his own and blows Raster back. Rionette's advice really paid off since Rick has watched Raster for long enough that he now sees the truth. While Raster does have a larger mana capacity than him, that's all he has. He never took the time or effort to truly refine his powers, so he has the potential to be stronger than Rick. But as of this moment, Rick understands that he is stronger than Raster. Raster tries to pass off Rick's successful counterpunch as a fluke, so he's going to get serious and cast a full incantation spell to take Rick out. But while his spell looked pretty impressive, Rick was able to block it with one hand and even insults Raster for his sloppy spell execution. Elisa doesn't understand how Rick could possibly block a spell of that level with his low mana capacity. So Mizette explains that Rick learned to have great control over his mana use, so even though Raster has more mana, Rick can use 100,000 times less mana to match Raster's spell casting. Raster's confidence is starting to falter, so he tries one last attack to prove that he's stronger, but Rick is far too fast for him and delivers a punch that forces Raster to use Iron Body defense magic. By this point, Raster has realized that Rick possesses far more power than the average E rank, but he still claims that he has just been getting lucky with his attacks up to this point. But Rick isn't falling for any more gaslighting. He knows that everything up till now has been a result of his strength, and on top of that, Rick didn't even use any strengthening magic, yet he was able to overpower Raster after he used it to attack. Raster realizes he can't bluff his way out of this, so he asks Rick how he managed to become so strong when he possesses very little mana, but Rick feels insulted that Raster thinks he used some cheap trick. He was thrown into a dragon's lair and wasn't allowed to leave until he defeated it. He got blasted over and over with extremely powerful explosions, and then he was forced to swim through a swamp of monster goo until he choked on it. Elisa can't believe Rick survived all that, but in reality, Rick didn't survive, but since Broston's healing magic is so powerful, as long as it was applied quickly, no matter how many times Rick ended up dying, they always brought him back to life. That's how he managed to exceed his physical limitations. And it is honestly surprising how well Rick handled it, since none of them had any regard for his safety, so if Mazette lushed him off a cliff for training and he died, they just called Broston to heal him. The same thing happened with Alice's training and Rionette's training, leading to several life-ending injuries. Raster doesn't believe any of it, though, since even if there was a way for Rick to train like that, what reason would he have to willingly put himself through hell like that? Rick says he has a dream of eventually killing the world's strongest monster, Kaiser Alcippide. Raster begins laughing at Rick because he thinks the monster is nothing more than an old story, but in truth, the monster is very real, and the main goal of the Orichalcum party is to one day eliminate it. Raster doesn't believe the monster exists and calls Rick dumb for believing in a children's story, but Rick doesn't care if Raster doesn't believe him, since his mission has nothing to do with him. Raster is tired of listening to Rick's stories, so he says he will now end this fight once and for all and uses a level 7 binding spell to hold Rick in place. He then begins the chant for the strongest spell he has available, the level 8 Yggdrasil Vine Mech. With this, Raster believes the fight has been won, since there's no way Rick would be able to overpower a spell this powerful. However, Rick begins charging up a level 1 air shot to fight back. Raster laughs at him and says a mere level 1 spell could never beat his level 8 spell. Yet Rick is still completely confident that his air shot will be enough to punch through Raster's Vine Mech, and that's because Raster has used this spell a handful of times at most, so he hasn't refined it to its utmost capabilities. On the other hand, Rick has used his air shot over 100 million times already, so he has learned how to unleash its full potential. No one believes Rick's claim of using the spell 100 million times, since it is physically impossible to have done that in only 2 years, but Broston assures Elisa that Rick is telling the truth, although he needed space-time magic to make it possible. Raster still doesn't believe it though, so he gets ready to smash Rick into the ground and finish this. But as he gets ready to punch, Rick effortlessly snaps the binds on his arms and legs and clashes with Raster. Raster is certain that he has won now that he has landed his attack, but then his mech started crumbling from Rick's power, before finally being shattered to pieces and sending Raster flying off into the stands, and he is still alive, but his pride definitely isn't. Hardly anyone can believe what they just saw, as an F-rank adventurer just defeated an A-rank, although Rick's friends totally expected this outcome. After Rick returns to the locker room, the other go to meet him and congratulate him on winning his fight, especially Elisa, who is really impressed by how strong he has gotten. Rick finally understands that he is really strong, and he doesn't know why he didn't realize it sooner, but he thanks his friends for training him so well. They tell them there's no need to thank them so formally, and instead they should all go out to celebrate at a bar. But before that, Rick hears the voices of Raster and his siblings entering the room, and Raster is clearly feeling the pain from Rick's punch, but he refuses to get treated for it. As Rick sees him, he starts telling Raster that there's a reason he lost the match today. Raster doesn't want to hear any mockery from Rick, but Rick is trying to give him some genuine advice, so he tells Raster that while he was training, he limited the number of techniques he would use in order to master them fully, so if Raster wishes to grow stronger, he should refine a single technique until he tells like he's going to die, but he doesn't have to follow the advice if he doesn't want to. Rick says he has high hopes for Raster's future as an adventurer, and it looks like Raster has finally learned some humility, since he silently walks past Rick and tells him that when the time comes for Rick's next promotion exam, Raster will make sure he is strong enough so that he doesn't lose a second time. Raster then leaves and his siblings follow after him, but before leaving, Angelica lowers her head to apologize for all the trouble she caused Rick, and then she helps Raster walk out. After that, the E-rank exams have officially concluded, so an announcement is made for the candidates who passed. As the numbers are called, Rick eagerly waits to hear his own, and meanwhile, the others have already started a preemptive celebratory feast for him since they are sure there's no way he will fail. Rick ends up passing his exam, but he seems a lot more calm about it than Rinette expected, and it's because he has a lot of stuff to think about. Rick recalls a time in his childhood when he read a book about a hero fighting the ultimate monster, Kaiser Alcipete, in order to obtain the Akashic Records, but ultimately, that hero failed to defeat it, so he left the Akashic Records to be found by future generations of adventurers. This was the moment Rick first decided that he wanted to become an adventurer just like the one in his storybook, but his mother wasn't too keen on him becoming an adventurer since the job is pretty dangerous, so she nicely tells Rick that she would be more at ease if he chose a different career. However, Rick's father was much less nice about it and told Rick that he should get a real job before throwing his life away as an adventurer. One day after a checkup, Rick was congratulated by his physician who tells him that he possessed an innate skill. Rick is in disbelief because innate skill is an insanely rare attribute which makes him pretty similar to Yamato the hero, but the doctor reminded him that innate skills aren't things that can be awoken through hard work, so it's going to take some time before he is able to use his ability. However, Rick was still every bit as happy as could be since this brought him one step closer to being able to declare himself as a successful adventurer to his parents. The next day, Rick wakes up and tells his friends that he's got an innate, and when he's finally able to use it, it's going to be amazing. However, days soon turned to weeks to months, and eventually, Rick had to come to terms with the fact that his innate skill would never manifest. His friends were sympathetic with him and encouraged Rick to try becoming an adventurer anyway, since most adventurers don't have innate abilities anyway. Plus, adventurers make a ton of money, so it's not a bad job. However, the reason Rick wanted to become an adventurer wasn't for the money, but to become like the hero Yamato. So since he can't become the kind of adventurer he was hoping to be, he decides to go get a real job after all. Rick tells his parents about his decision, and they are overjoyed to hear that Rick has finally given up on his dreams and is ready to get a soul-crushing job like a normal person. The next few years went by with Rick learning the ropes of the receptionist job and watching countless adventurers all living out his dream, so as time went on, Rick became more and more jaded to reality until finally he grew to accept his mediocre life and enjoy the time he spent with his friends and family. One day, while looking through his old books, he finds that storybook of Yamato's legendary adventures, but by now it's nothing more than an old fairy tale he used to believe in. Rick heads into work the next day, and Elisa had just been hired at the time, so she was struggling to keep up with all the paperwork. Rick came over to help her out a bit and reminded her that there was no need to rush the learning process, since she'll get the hang of it sooner or later. There's also one more thing he wants to tell her, since from what he has seen around town, monsters are becoming more active, so a quest will likely pop up soon to subjugate them. Elisa is thankful for the heads up since she can now get the forms ready ahead of time. As Elisa leaves to go get the paperwork done, an adventurer Rick is friends with walks in, and he's got something to show Rick. He just got back from his promotion exam, and he is proud to say that he is officially a B-rank adventurer from this day onwards. Rick is happy for his friend, but he would be lying if he said he wasn't jealous seeing someone get to live out his dream of becoming an adventurer. To deal with the jealousy, Rick does what any responsible adult would do and drinks late into the night to make the pain go away. But even with his drunken state, the difference between himself and Zaid are crystal clear. Zaid has been promoted all the way up to B rank and is living Rick's life, while Rick has sat in the same chair for 14 years at this point, and he has nothing to show for it other than a stable income and a few yearly pay raises. It's not like he thinks he wasted his life, but he can't help but wonder how far he could have come if he chose to become an adventurer, after all back then. Just then, Rick hears a commotion in the middle of town, and he goes to check it out and see if he can help. However, what he sees horrifies him since, for whatever reason, there's a mid-rank hand troll in the city. Under normal circumstances, as soon as Rick saw that thing, he would have run away, but he notices a woman walks right into the path of the troll, and he can't just stand by while someone gets hurt, so runs out in front of the woman to try and protect her from the troll, even if he can't really do much to hold it back. As the monster closes in on them, Rick braces himself for a gruesome death, but before that could happen, Rinette walks out in front of Rick and slashes the monster to pieces. She then tells Rick that she appreciates him trying to protect her, but there's no need to be concerned for her safety, since she is a skilled adventurer. After that, Rick and Rinette walk together and introduce themselves to one another, after which Rick says he was really impressed with how strong Rinette was back there, so he asks her if she happens to be a B-rank adventurer. Rinette says she's not B-rank, so Rick assumes she must be A-rank, and he is amazed since it's a rare occasion to meet an A-rank adventurer out in town, but Rinette corrects him once more and says she's not an A-rank either. She then pulls out her S-rank badge to prove her rank to Rick, and the shock Rick feels is immeasurable. S-rank adventurers are so powerful and rare that this is his first time meeting one. In fact, there are rumors that HQ intentionally takes them out of the local guild registers and oversees their missions directly. He can't believe he gets to meet such a legendary adventurer, but since she's here, he says he has a weird question to ask. So he pleads with Reinette not to laugh at him. Reinette assures him that she hasn't laughed even once in the 9 years after her 8th birthday, but Rick isn't sure if she should be proud of that. Moving on, Rick tells Reinette about the dream he had when he was younger to become an adventurer and eventually defeat Kaiser Alcipiat, so he wants to know if she thinks he could still achieve his dream if he tried becoming an adventurer today, even though he's already 30. After seeing how Rick acted when he thought she was in danger, she is sure that he possesses the courage necessary to become an adventurer. But Rick must be aware of the importance of mana reserves to adventurers. Rick says he is aware that mana reserves are hard to develop unless it is done during your youth, but difficult is an understatement as Reinette believes it is practically impossible to build your mana reserves once you grow older. Considering the importance of mana reserves to adventuring, Reinette has to be honest with him and says she doesn't think Rick could make it as an adventurer if he started as he is now. Rick was already expecting an answer like that, but it still hurts to hear. At the very least, he finds closure in the fact that it was an S-rank adventurer who broke the news to him, so there's nothing left to do but give up on his dreams and settle into his ordinary life. Reinette apologizes if she made Rick feel bad, but he says it's fine since he appreciates her honesty. Plus, it's not every day he gets to meet a lady as pretty as her, so he even invites her to grab a meal with him sometime. Although he was only joking, Reinette immediately agrees to his dinner invitation and offers to meet him tomorrow for their date. The next day, Rick is in a really good mood, so he wants to work even harder than usual today. Even when Zeta comes in and brags about his new B-rank status, Rick doesn't show even a hint of jealousy and wishes him luck on his next quest. By the end of the day, Rick is happily skipping down the road to meet up with Reinette, and he is slightly hoping that they could start dating if things end up going well on their date. But then he hears people screaming that monsters are attacking, so unfortunately, his date plans are ruined. Since Reinette was supposed to meet him nearby, Rick assumes she must already be fighting the monsters, so he rushes to check on her, although she seems to be doing alright on her own. There are a lot of monsters approaching, so Reinette asks Rick to stand back while she handles this and he lets her do her things. Moments later, the battlefield is covered with hundreds of monster chunks and Reinette looks like she's barely even warmed up, but all of a sudden, she senses something that gives her flashbacks to the death of everyone she loved, and the trauma makes her fall to her knees. A monster happens to show up right as Reinette is having a panic attack and Rick isn't equipped to defend her, but luckily, Zaid steps in at the last second and saves them both. Rick is thankful, but he also doesn't know why Zaid is here in the first place. Just then, 2 other adventurers show up to help as well, and Zaid tells Rick that the guild put out an emergency quest to subjugate these monsters, so they all rushed over to help. And since they are here now, Rick should hurry up and get his date to safety while they handle the rest of the monsters. While the adventurers are fighting the monsters, Rick realizes that he is still as jealous of them as he has always been. After Reinette regains some of her composure, she warns Rick that it's dangerous for him to be here. Rick tries to reassure her that the B-rank adventurers will be able to handle the rest of the monsters, but Reinette says they won't be strong enough to handle what's coming. She tells Rick that there's a dragon nearby and she won't be able to fight it due to years of unaddressed trauma that causes her to lose control of the magic within her body whenever she senses a dragon. Rick doesn't believe a dragon would appear all the way out here, but in the next moment, something flies overhead, and as Rick looks up, he spots the dragon Reinette was talking about. It makes no sense for a dragon to show up in a human town. According to the guild's recommendations, if an adventurer lower than A rank ends up encountering a dragon, the only thing they can do is stand still and pray that the dragon leaves on its own. And no matter what, no one should attack the dragon first, but the magician gets scared and does exactly what the rules said not to do, leading to the entire B-rank group getting decimated. There's no way any of them can fight the dragon, so Zaid tells everyone to make a run for it, but as they try to escape, they find themselves trapped in a barrier the dragon put up. It looks like the dragon doesn't intend to let any of them here alive, and they stand no chance against it, but Rick begins walking straight up to the dragon. Zaid tells him to stop since there's nothing he can do to the dragon as a receptionist, but the way Rick sees it, if he's going to die anyway, he might as well face death head-on and die as an adventurer would. Rick thought he would feel better if he gave up on his dream of being an adventurer, but he still feels the fire inside pushing him to work towards that goal. He picks up a rock and throws it at the dragon, and it does absolutely nothing, but Rick's bravery motivates the other adventurers to try their best as well, even if they know they'll lose in the end. They all begin throwing every attack they have at the dragon, but it doesn't do much other than provoke the dragon into using its fire breath. Zaid realizes this is probably going to be bad, so he uses his iron body skill to protect everyone, and while it allows them to survive, they still suffer a considerable amount of damage from it. But from the flaming rubble, Rick gets up and walks straight over to the dragon, claiming that he will make his dream come true no matter what it takes. The dragon uses its foot to squish Rick, but on the verge of death, Rick's dormant innate skill awakens, giving him the power necessary to survive being stepped on and push the dragon away with ease. The amount of magic flowing from his body is so potent that it is actually visible, and Rick realizes that this must be his innate skill. So while he wishes it awakened earlier, it's better late than never. Now that he has the power necessary to fight back, Rick is a lot more confident about facing the dragon. So as it fires another blast at him, he stretches his hand out and blocks the fire with his magical energy. And when he finally gets the chance to counterattack, Rick unleashes a punch that carves a hole straight through the dragon's body, killing it in an instant. Once it's all over, Rick goes back to normal and collapses to the ground, and by the time he wakes up, he's in a hospital bed and in great physical pain. Renet is there as well and informs Rick that he overloaded every single magic circuit in his body during the fight with the dragon, so by all accounts, he should already be dead. He's been unconscious for about a week, and the entire time Renet has been waiting by his bedside because she wants to personally invite Rick to join the party she's a part of Orichalcum Fist. The party's goal is to defeat Kaiser Alcipiat just like Rick, and after seeing Rick fight on courage alone, even when he didn't have the power to win, gives her the confidence to say that Rick can grow stronger and fight alongside the S-Rank party and become an adventurer. This was the first time anyone ever supported the idea of Rick becoming an adventurer, so he is moved to tears by Renet's faith in him. That leads us back to the present where Rick has just officially passed his E-Rank exam, so for the first time in his life he can say that he is an adventurer. This was the end of episode 4. Subscribe to not miss the next part.